Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. Today it's finally time to do a deck tech on Icaria Black after Kamato and I dominated last weekend's ETS, and we also dominated our Team League match with Icaria Black going 3-0. So I assume everybody of you is dying to hear all about the deck and the card choices in it. You know what it looks like by now for the most part, but let's dive into it. Alright, so this is the deck list. It's almost the same as I ran at the weekend. Basically, only one change that I made is I cut an Annihilate for a Force Seed of Glory, because I just felt like the deck has some power issues, and stumbling on your 5th power is deadly, and even stumbling on your 6th and 7th power can be quite devastating. Icaria is a whole lot more powerful on turn 7 than on any later turn. So it's definitely pretty important to hit your first 7 power drops on curve, and especially in matchups like the Mirror and other control decks, Wanted Poster really cannot be relied on to help you hit those power drops. As you saw in plenty of games, the card will just sit in your hand forever, and you will be glad if you eventually get a chance to use it to break an Aegis or even draw some cards against some decks. So in some matchups, the power count is fine, where you just can aggressively Wanted Poster early, but in others it isn't, and the deck, I just lost too many games and matches to too many games mostly. I didn't lose a lot of matches to missing power drops. Especially the mirrors against Kamado were particularly troubling in that regard. And I wasn't too excited or happy with the Force Annihilate anyway in a lot of matchups, especially right now. So I wasn't concerned about cutting it. If there was a better card than the Annihilate, I would have cut it earlier already. And now, since I wanted another power, it was an easy cut. Okay, so the initial deck was Kamado's idea. He came up with the core idea of just playing a Fire, Justice, Shadow control deck, topping off it for Icaria, rather than the traditional armory with less Icaria and more weapons and artisans and stuff like that. So this is definitely not the same deck. It is much more of a traditional reactive control deck that just tries to kill everything the opponent does and then win with Rise to the Challenge, Daisho, and Icaria. My main contribution to the deck basically was Starsteel Daisho, because Kamado has some irrational dislike for the card. I still don't know why. This just doesn't make any sense. The card is incredibly powerful and is part of why I like the deck and think the deck is as good as it is. And yeah, he basically gave posted a list on our team with 4 Vanquish, 4 Annihilate, 0 Daisho, and the first thing I did was cut some Vanquish for 2 Daishos, since even without Artisan with 4 Rise, 4 Icaria, there's plenty of things to go around to make Daisho really powerful. And 4 Vanquish is something that I'm not super happy with in the main deck anyway, because there's not that many decks that have a ton of good Vanquish targets these days, and also running 12 spot removal and 4 harsh rule and 4 torch and the hammers and stuff is just too much. There's such a thing as too much removal, because there's matchups where you don't even have that many things to kill and you need to be able to do things, and Daisho is great at killing stuff later on, controlling the board, even 2-for-1ing, so it's kind of like a harsh rule in that regard against a lot of boards, and also just kills people, and especially a bunch of control decks can simply not beat a 6-4 Daisho or 6-8 Daisho from a Throne Warden buff. And if you ever get it with an Icaria buff, it's completely broken. It's easily the best thing to be hit by an Icaria buff, since an Icaria doesn't necessarily win you the game, but getting the buff on something like a Daisho definitely will win you the game if they answer your Icaria. And yeah, the other change that I basically made was cutting a Seed of Glory for a Fire Sigil because I didn't like the 16 and 9 and felt like the deck has more than enough justice, so the Seed of Glory wasn't adding that much in terms of color fixing, but a Fire Sigil would make the remaining 7 seeds a lot smoother, and I feel like with 8 Crest the deck is already kind of slow and clunky, so it's really important that at least your seeds are usually ready power sources and not depleted ones. So I made that change. But now that I went up to 26 power, I added a Seed of Glory again. But I can still see turning the Seed of Glory into another Fire Sigil potentially if the power base still feels a little too slow and draggy. But I think in 26 the 4 seed is fine. Like, as long as you have these like at least 10 base sigils plus like some seeks and maybe privileges for later seeds, you should be fine. And yeah, the deck is just a whole lot of removal, Quarry and Wanted Poster for card draw and card selection. Poster is particularly good here because the deck has so many ways of activating it between all the spot removal, harsh roll and the weapons. Then unlike Armory, where I usually hated running more than 2 Rise because the card is really clunky and the deck just was too behind too often, with so many like cheap spot removal that can deal with big threats, it's much easier to buy yourself a turn to just do nothing and rise to the challenge for an Icaria or a Daisho, or even just a Runehammer or a Warden sometimes. So I have been much happier with 4 Rise here. It's still possible that the 4th Rise is a bit much and it should be 3, but 4 wasn't terrible, at least for now, so I don't find it like super urgent to cut one. Also, there's not a lot of options I would want to add. Then, yeah, Warden and Icaria as the only units is important to make opposing removal as bad as possible, and also make Icaria buffs as good as possible, because you only want to hit weapons or Aegis units. And that's why there's, for example, no main deck Enforcers, because they're just diluting your Icaria triggers. Getting Icaria buffs on Enforcers is mostly just not very good, because the opponent will have a lot of removal stranded in their hand that they will just immediately throw at it, and then you just didn't get any value out of your Icaria buff really, while drawing the big Aegis units and relic weapons is usually game-changing or game-winning. And blanking the opposing removal is also really strong. And yeah, weapons, there's only the premium weapons for Runehammer and 2 Daisho. Sword of Icaria is just too weak and situational and underpowered, so that's why that's not here. Artisan doesn't make sense with the amount of units and so on. And the last thing is, what I could see trying is playing Alchemist main deck now with the buff. Alchemist's actually pretty good, and it's pretty well rounded against all sorts of matchups. Rise synergizes nice with it. Like, for example, if you play it on turn 3 and it dies immediately, on turn 4 you can just Rise, put it back in play as a 4/2 lifesteal, drain them again, and draw a card to help against aggressive decks. It's generally really good at helping against aggressive decks, which the deck is a bit soft to, especially Stone Sky and Skycrack. Rakano is pretty nice of a matchup actually. And yeah, it, like, what I would probably try is something like cut a Rise, cut an Annihilate, cut an Enforcer, and probably go back down to 25 power and play like 4 Alchemists and see how that plays out. I tried it a bit, wasn't too sure how good it is, which is why I didn't include it in the video. But it's definitely something that could be nice, because it's also pretty solid with Icaria. Like, if you have it floating with Destiny on top, and then you just buff it with Icaria, you draw like a 0 cost 7/7 lifesteal that cantrips, which is pretty powerful. And it's at least still planking Annihilate. It makes the opposing torches and slays a bit better, and like stuff like opposing Runehammers and so on. But it's also pretty nice against them. It can pressure them, it can shoot down opposing Runehammers that try to pressure you and stuff like that. And it's really good against aggro. So it has some appeal and gives the deck a bit more to do in a bit less clunky and dirtly nature and draws. Alright, that's it for the deck list. Really like the deck. both on ladder and in tournaments. In tournaments it's arguably even stronger than on ladder. Very well rounded. The most scary matchups in tournaments probably are aggro decks like Skycrack, especially Skycrack, but with the drones that I was running, the matchup was very reasonable. The drones completely destroy Skycrack in conjunction with what the rest of the deck does, so that was a pretty big deal. But yeah, without the drones, Skycrack is a really, really bad matchup. I think Kamato got really lucky beating that Skycrack guy 3-1, because he didn't have any sideboard cards for it, and the Skycrack guy normally would just rip him to shreds. It's just way too fast, and the Aegis units are really problematic, and Runehammer is really slow and clunky, like especially when you're on the draw with this deck against Skycrack, or when you like don't draw at Horse, it's so hard to get anywhere before they just kill you. Alright, that's it for the deck list. As usual, gonna hop into some games, show the deck in action on ladder, and show you how to pilot the deck if you haven't seen enough of that already from my tournament videos and the Team League videos. But I hope you guys enjoy some more insightful and explanatory gameplay with the deck, this time on ladder rather than in a tournament setting. Alright, 6 games coming up. Stay tuned for game 1 next.